afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for yet another episode of the California Proprietarian Podcast, or CAPROPCAST for short, as we like to call it. I am your host, Philip Young, and on this show, we like to discuss all kinds of current topical issues, primarily in the United States of America, that have the potential to affect private property rights. On this show, we strongly believe that the individual natural right to private property is bestowed by God upon all of us. You know, from the moment we receive life, we have the divine gift of life breathed into us, and the primary gift, the temporal gift anyway, that he bestows upon us from on high is the individual natural right to our private property and to the fruits and wages of our labor. So we discuss all kinds of topical issues that have the potential to affect that have implications for that. And what we're going to be talking about today primarily is the activities of the unconstitutional federal agency, the Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA. We have a subject matter expert on today to discuss their abuses and their unconstitutional violations and usurpations, primarily against the rural peoples of South Dakota, but also against Americans in other parts of the country more broadly. His name is David Graves. He's a subject matter expert on this particular issue. And with that, I'll kick the intro over to David, and he can tell us a little bit more about his background and his qualifications in that regard. And then right after that, we'll dive into the meat of the issue. So, David, thank you so much for joining us. And you can go ahead and give your own introduction and a summary of your resume, and then we'll dive into it.
Well, thank you, Phil. So yeah, as Phil said, my name is David Graves. I'm currently studying at South Dakota School of Mines and Technology to be a metallurgical engineer. And I also work with the Coalition for a Constructive Tomorrow, or CFACT, as one of their Dreesen Fellows, which is basically student activist who gets other students involved in climate and personal property related issues. I have screened many events, or I've screened a couple of movies with them. I've done many events. And on campus, we've also had tabling events talking about what actual green energy looks like, nuclear power.
Excellent. Very well said. And that's something that is frequently ignored by most left-wing or left-leaning environmental activists. Nuclear power, we've known for a long time, generally speaking, is one of the cleanest, safest, and most efficient forms of reliable energy for the modern post-industrial world. And yet they generally completely ignore it because I suspect it's because it would undercut their ability to control modern economies, which they clearly want to do, and also because the nuclear power lobby isn't controlled by the backers and the handlers of these far left environmental activists. So therefore, they want nothing to do with it, and they don't want our societies to have anything to do with it in spite of its benefits. But real quick, what I wanted to ask David before we dive into the rest of it is you also did a campaign with for YAL, right? We worked together on a legislative campaign in Rapid City a couple summers ago.
Yep. Oh, yep. Sorry, I forgot to mention that one.
Excellent. Yeah, it's just part of your activist background. I just wanted to make sure people knew you have a solidly grounded background in pro-liberty activism.
Oh yeah, we successfully got 10 candidates in during the last cycle. Now this cycle, it's been about 4 years since then. We are proud to say we now have 14 victories. Sadly, one of our champions, Jody Fry Mueller, she got the huge cancel treatment over some out of context stuff that was said, and a intern that had a mental breakdown because she couldn't handle the heat, so she had to leave the kitchen. Right.
Yeah, and that this is it's very common for people that try to stand up to defend private property rights to get that cancel treatment. Yes. So it
was all about stopping getting the jab. Because there were a few people that tried to make getting the jab mandatory, and well, I ended their careers. Senator Tim Goodwin has yet again lost and is demanding another recount.
Oh, there we go. Okay, so he's challenging election results. My understanding, given what I've read from the New York Times, is that's equivalent to undermining democracy.
Yeah.
So
absolutely,
he sounds like a dangerous insurrectionist to me.
And hey, he's a Republican too. I mean, albeit any intelligent politician in South Dakota runs as a Republican.
Right.
Heck, even in YAL, we don't run libertarian candidates as Republicans because that would just be stupid. Too many people think libertarians are Lamau, guns, and weed when we just, well, yeah, guns and weed, but
Right. Yes.
we but we care about more stuff than that. We care very much about just not hurting people and not taking their stuff. And a lot of people, when you tell them that, they say, "Oh, I agree with that too."
Yeah.
So a lot of people will think on the libertarian side, just they don't like the word. So that's why our general belief is Republican is not a party; it is a vehicle for victory. But
yes.
enough about that.
A front group, if you will. To use Politico terminology, I suppose. But yeah, those were good old days. I revel in those days, and I'm very glad to have gotten acquainted with you and the rest of the crew back there in that phase of activism. So I'm most grateful for that. But now getting back to the EPA real quick, it's no secret to any of us that South Dakota is a largely rural and largely conservative state, perhaps one of the most demographically conservative states in the union. And I noticed vast expanses of rural areas, farmland included, just outside of Rapid City. So I would imagine that the EPA, given what it is, which is a very top-heavy, cumbersome, overly funded, bloated federal bureaucracy that has no business in the area or in any part of the country, really, I would imagine that they love nothing more than getting up in the business of rural and mostly conservative South Dakotans. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
This is where the EPA is actually kind of stealthy and actually covert and subtle. I know. Pinch yourself. This isn't a dream. Mm-hmm. What they do is they get companies that are backed by government money, companies to go in and say, "Oh, hey, how about we put a wind turbine on your land?" So they go up to some farmer and tell him the deal is basically, "Hey, for X years, we're going to be the ones who own the wind turbine and benefit from it. And then after X amount of time, you get to be the owner of the wind turbine. You get all the benefits of owning a wind turbine, and you get to collect money from it."
So it's like
what they don't mention is, one, wind turbine blades will break. And they also cannot be recycled. They are, in fact, they're not even safe to bury.
So,
in addition to that, wind turbines will fall apart around right when the contract is up, and the farmer's the owner of it, and now he has to maintain it.
So it's a particularly perverse form of planned obsolescence combined with an equally perverse form of indentured servitude, it would seem.
Absolutely. And wind turbines need a lot of oil.
Oh, so which would appear to if you go by the climate change activist narrative, that would appear to defeat the purpose.
Yes, but the people paying for climate change activists are also paid for by the people who pay the wind turbine companies in addition to the government. The wind turbine companies receive quite a bit of money along with those activists. They get all their resources from oil and gas companies who also happen to be lobbying against nuclear energy.
So this is a racket that, in terms of its form and in terms of its structure, if not, certainly not in terms of its scale and the amount of profit it generates, but it runs parallel to structurally the military-industrial complex. You have this situation where, these major defense corporations like Boeing, Raytheon, McDonnell Douglas, Northrop Grumman, what have you, they receive these immense federally funded contracts and subsidies, obviously at American taxpayer expense. And in the meantime, these CEOs and the members of the boards of directors enrich themselves obscenely,
absolutely,
due to these, these blood conflicts, that the U.S. is involved in, this blood money, and
we need the oil.
And the American taxpayer gets to pay for it all. They get billed.
They also get to suffer the consequences. They get to suffer the real world material consequences of this. I mean, do you think all those celebrities that are talking about climate change are actually going green? Do you think they're actually, using mass transit? Do you think they're carpooling? No.
The only one I can think of that actually walked the walk on that is Tulsi Gabbard, and the Democratic establishment in D.C. hates her. They
She's
hate her
also got
guts.
the advantage of being in Hawaii most of the time.
Right.
Yeah. But, okay, Tulsi Gabbard, I do have to walk back a bit there. She's turning out to be pretty decent.
Yes, certainly. I mean, I don't agree on most of her domestic economic policies, but as far as her anti-war and anti-military industrial complex stance, I couldn't be more on board with it. She definitely fights for what's right in those areas. So you've talked about how the EPA comes in and they essentially screw over these rural farmers, with these promises of all the benefits of these subsidized wind turbines. Are you aware of any other major abuses that the EPA and agencies like it
This
perpetrate?
is more of them being sneaky.
Oh, more of them being sneaky. Okay, I'd love to hear it.
They'll go on to. So the most recent debacle was about a CO2 pipeline.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, the idea was CO2 is taken out of atmosphere and is shipped somewhere else.
Oh.
Which we can get into the insanity of that later.
Sounds filthy.
Oh, yeah. And it would have to go through a whole lot of farmland. And you can't just spawn pipe underground. You have to dig that ground up. You have to fence off those areas.
Right.
You have to keep animals away. And you also have to effectively poison the ground there anyways to make sure specific plants will never grow there. Because if you have a root burst your pipe, you're boned. And so what they had going on in South Dakota was government vehicles getting onto farmland, just going through fences, sometimes tearing down fences, not even taking the time to open them up, just drive through them. And you had these government dudes surveying the land without telling the owner about it. And so you had some poor guy with, some poor farmer with a shotgun drive on up because he's like, there's something on my land. They drive up and they see government plates on those cars. They normally, if you're trying to get away with that after breaking a fence, you're going to get shot.
Right, of course, in most cases, but of course, their sovereign immunity,
their government,
their sovereign immunity and their qualified immunity, protects them from the prospects of that most of the time. But is the agency invoking eminent domain when they do this? I'm just curious.
They're trying. In fact, we had a bill that recently got shut down. It was an anti-eminent domain bill. Basically, it was going to say the carbon pipeline does not get to use eminent domain because it wouldn't fall under eminent domain as is, because in order for it to be eminent domain, everyone has to have the ability to use it. And I can't just bag up CO2 from my car. I can't just bag up the emissions and hand it over to the pipeline people.
Right.
The trains get to claim eminent domain because I get to ship stuff via train. I get to hop on a train and go to another state if need be.
You ostensibly benefit from it as a member of the public, and so that's how it gets legally and constitutionally justified under the doctrine of eminent domain. But it seems here that this project would probably be of little to no benefit to the public, and actually might do a considerable amount to harm, particularly the rural public. And I think it's also demonstrative of the broader contempt that the elitist bureaucrats and elitist elected officials and their handlers, their controllers in the D.C. Beltway. It's demonstrative of the degree of contempt and disdain they have for the vast majority of rural Americans.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, heck, I go to a big city, and do you want to know what people still think about? So many people still think about South Dakota when you go to the coasts.
Oh, I bet.
You leave the Midwest.
I bet.
They think you're naive because you feel the need to be nice to everyone and wave to everyone while you're driving. Mm-hmm. Then I have been asked more than once, where are the Indians? I don't see them riding their horses when I come to South Dakota.
Oh, gosh. So their ideas about what rural America is like are largely defined by storybooks and by John Wayne movies.
No, because they all believe in that noble savage myth, which that can be a different episode entirely.
Right.
So I won't get too far into it.
And so you can kind of see as you do your research and your investigations into the activities of federal agencies in rural South Dakota, you can see in real time, how little these bureaucrats care about the health and well-being of. Do you think that a lot of it has to do with the fact that there is at least this implicit, tacit knowledge in the D.C. Beltway that rural populations, including the one in South Dakota where you're from, that we're talking about, they are the ones that are the least likely to vote for the preferred candidates of these bureaucrats and elitist elected officials?
Honestly, that's probably what's going on. I didn't put too much thought into that, but I wouldn't be surprised if they really didn't like us for that reason alone.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, think about this. You have big city people who you probably can't name everyone on your block. Meanwhile, I know all my neighbors, and I know a little bit of trivia about each of them.
Mm-hmm.
I have had interactions with them. I have gone to church with some of them. I have delivered cookies after they shoveled my driveway when I sprained my ankle.
Right. So it's a real sense of community. It's the type of sense of community that you really generally only get in a place, in a sector of society that is relatively high trust, and where the population is relatively sparse, it's lower, and it's usually more homogenous.
Oh, absolutely. And sadly, the only thing that's kind of sad about what's going on community-wise is so many people don't get informed about anything. They just kind of vote down the line, and we got a lot of Democrats in Republicans' clothing. And so a lot of the conservative people say, oh, there's an R, and they had a bigger billboard. So we still have people coming to the state thinking that Kristi Noem is some freedom Barbie.
Mm-hmm. Well,
when she signed the bill that is currently going to give those CO2 pipeline companies the ability to claim eminent domain.
And, of course, I'm sure that her signing that bill had absolutely nothing to do with the fact that I would say, and I don't know this for a fact, so, don't take it for gospel, but I'm willing to bet that there were absolutely no promises of future campaign contributions made to Kristi Noem and her campaign and her administration.
Because she's been making it very clear. She has aspirations for federal office.
Yes, she does.
I mean, heck, I just read an article this morning from my local newspaper talking about how Kristi Noem still supports Donald Trump despite not being the VP candidate. I'm like, what? Finally, more people are actually catching on to the fact that she wants to go federal. She wants to play buddy-buddy with all the federal agencies. Well, she'll voice, oh, I hate the EPA. I hate the companies that they support, as she signs into law the very key to stealing property.
Yeah, it's really two-faced. It's really cloak and dagger, and it reminds me of how so many neocon Republicans, so many neocon, I guess, elitist or mainstream Republicans, they are very good at around election season being sure to talk the talk. They'll talk real big about protecting gun rights. They'll talk real big about a big game about protecting private property rights from rapacious and predatory federal agencies, in the hopes, and usually they're right, that most people won't be paying attention to what they actually do quietly when they're in office.
Mm-hmm.
That ruin people's lives.
I mean, it's a kind of a microcosm of just the general political career. You never see a far-right, super conservative person stay very conservative without any external pressure, nor do you see someone moderate getting more conservative, or actually you do see them get more liberal now that I'm thinking about it, but that's just because it's the easy mode right now.
The DC Beltway tends to have that effect.
Yeah,
I've noticed.
Because if you want to fit in, you have to turn into a moderate in order to continue getting elected. And you have to keep on towing the line. You have to keep towing we're going to die in 20 years. Oh, now it's 21 years. Oh, now it's 23 years. Oh, 30 years, from climate change.
Right.
They keep pushing back the date because they have to have that ticking clock to make everyone scared. When people are scared, they act stupid. When they're scared, they will believe the first thing they see on Facebook.
That's true. Well, anger and fear are tremendous tools of control, because when you're angry and scared, you're easy to manipulate. And along that vein, I feel compelled to ask, what in your recommendation, based on what you personally observed, would be the best methods or the best language to use in communicating, particularly to rural Americans, how they need to be voting if they genuinely want these abuses and usurpations by these federal agencies to be blocked? How would you recommend reaching out to them and marketing the right kinds of candidates and legislative programs to them?
Well, you first just got to figure out what they actually care about. You got to ask them, hey, how do you feel about your property being seized? Oh, you don't like that? Here's what this candidate did. Here's what this candidate will do. And if they don't do it, we get rid of them next election cycle. Of course, when I say get rid of, I mean unelect them.
Right. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. No.
I have had enough times where people are like, "What do you mean get rid of?" I'm like,
well, always add in Minecraft.
Yeah, that's an option too. But how many rural voters in South Dakota? Because a lot of the rural voters, they're up in counties that have 100 people at most.
Right.
And a lot of them are too busy to play Minecraft.
Oh, right. Yes. No, quite so. I can imagine
having to pay attention to cows, and cows are very good at finding new ways to get lost, hurt, or destroy property.
It's a full-time job, but in and of itself.
It's babysitting a ton of hamburger.
Yes, no, that's quite true, and milk production, of course. Now, I have to ask, I remember this was about several months ago, and I'm a little fuzzy on the exact details, but I remember reading an article in my newsfeed, I think it might have even been on the front page of Yahoo News, about how Governor Kristi Noem was taking some kind of executive action or proposing legislation in the South Dakota State Legislature to prevent, not the EPA, but the Bureau of Land Management, which, of course, is closely related in function and mission. It's the other BLM, of course. She was ostensibly trying to prevent the Bureau of Land Management from violating the private property rights of South Dakotans even more. Do you think that was kind of more of a smokescreen on her part to win over?
It was most certainly a smokescreen, because it wasn't the Bureau of Land Management that was trying to do anything. It was a private corporation or a private business, effectively, that was trying to do it. That was just happened to be the puppet of government-paid agencies.
So what we're seeing here is this perfect merging of capital and the public sector right here. We're seeing the very much the operation of a shadow corporatocracy in which the state is so close. The apparatus of the state itself is so closely interwoven with and so closely allied with and married to elements of what are supposed to at least nominally be the private sector in order to achieve total hegemonic domination over a population.
Now,
under the guise of capitalism.
Oh, it gets better, because it's more than just businesses. It's also academia. So many times in academia, if you need funding for a research paper, if you need funding for some topic that you're doing, add the word climate, and you will suddenly get all the funding you need. But if you say oil, without saying replacing oil, if you just say, I'm researching a new way to do something with oil, the funding is dry.
Crickets.
Yep.
Just crickets.
You're hearing crickets. But if you say, even if it's something that doesn't actually really relate to climate, if it's the effect of climate on the mental health of gay teenagers in Albuquerque.
Right. The effect of climate change on the psychological well-being of historically marginalized, sexual orientations and gender identities.
Or how climate change affects people's views on historical statues.
Because apparently, even if this whole climate change narrative was true, which much of it is not, that's being promoted by the mainstream media and the Biden regime and their allies. Even if it was true, I don't really see how trannies would experience it differently than normally gendered people.
Yeah, you can find these articles. You can find
I've seen them.
Articles. You can find these research papers and. You look at them and you're wondering, did the Babylon Bee write this?
Well, reality has become a parody of itself. So,
I mean,
really.
And then the scientists that are saying, hey, no, the science isn't settled. They're not getting on the news. They're not getting extra money. They have to scrap together pennies elsewhere. They have to save their money. Meanwhile, if you're going to say, hey, I'm going to do a research paper on this climate thing. I'm going to study this for a while. And here's my conclusion. Boom, you suddenly get money.
Well, it's really incredible how that works because we see that pattern in the military-industrial complex. We see it in Big Pharma. Where whether or not somebody receives the funding for the research project they want to do, it's entirely dependent, in the big pharma sphere on whether or not they're going to act as a loyal prescriber of the products that big pharma corporations seek to foist on the wider population.
Absolutely.
And so, what we're seeing, it's really incredible. In traditional, tyrannical political systems, this form of tyranny, it was very much obviously enforced from the top down. But here in the United States and in other Western so-called liberal democracies, what we're seeing is a gradual foisting of cultural Marxism and also these economic takeovers under the guise of environmentally friendly activism. We're seeing it advanced by this really perverse alliance of the public sector and capital, or of the public and private sectors. And in the meantime, a lot of people on the right don't pay attention because they look at private sector activities and they just assume that it's free market capitalism when in fact it's not.
Absolutely. And then you also have everyone's entertainment is coming in, because let's face it, if X famous person says something, all of their fans are inclined to believe it. I mean, you got like Taylor Swift saying, oh, we need to worry about the environment. We need to be more environmentally conscious. But just in her most current tour, she has been responsible for 139 tons of carbon dioxide emissions. And that's just going through South America and North America.
So on this last tour alone, her and her entourage have produced a larger carbon footprint, a carbon footprint probably many times larger than you and I will generate in our entire lives.
Yeah. Heck,
quite possibly.
I'd say probably it's on par with the carbon production of small states over here.
Oh, it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest. Of course, fraudulent, vapid celebrities are nothing new here. But it's endlessly infuriating how in the same breath they will turn around and lecture you about how evil and white and racist and heterosexual and male you are, as though any of that has to do with emissions or climate change. It's really weird how they literally talk about climate racism or environmental racism when it really seems like what they're trying to promote is the idea that straight white men are the ultimate evil no matter what.
Yeah, but actually I do have to correct you. They are not promoting environmental racism. They're promoting environmental equity. Equity,
yes, of course.
Yep, yeah. Equity. It's all about equity.
Which the more accurate term would be egalitarianism, to promote the notion that there should be, average socioeconomic equality of members of demographic groups, which is an incredibly dangerous notion, to presume that all average demographic differences in social and economic status must be because of discriminatory policy.
Mm-hmm. And because if you are able to make choices, then at some point you have to take responsibility. And that goes to other people as well. If other people are able to make choices, or if they're able to be the ones who decided to do something, if they're the ones who decided to get a liberal arts degree instead of maybe go to trade school, they have to be the ones responsible for working at McDonald's.
But instead they want their student debts that other taxpayers had to pay for, that they want that forgiven by fiat.
Mm-hmm.
So they're quite addicted to the largesse of the taxpayer funded largesse of the state. It would seem. And I mean, when I in the short time, in the roughly a month I spent in Rapid City, South Dakota, what I noticed is, this is slightly off topic here, but I think it's tangentially related. I noticed that the Lakota Sioux population tended to be much more impoverished on average than the other demographics I noticed out there. And
the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation is the poorest place in the United States,
mired in poverty. But what I also noticed is I looked at a lot of those same Lakota Sioux Indians that were living in poverty, and their tobacco use was very heavy. Their consumption of alcoholic beverages was very heavy. I saw a number of them that were very obviously drug addicts. They would consistently eat horrible quality food. And when you see these consistent, willful, deliberate patterns of behavior, it's small wonder that they continue to be mired in poverty. And yet we're constantly told that when populations of people on average consistently choose voluntarily these incredibly unhealthy, destructive lifestyles, we're told it's the fault of white America, which is a mystery to me.
With that one, because my best friend in the entire world, the man I will take bullets for, the man I would sell all my both kidneys for, he's a Lakota Sioux, and he's making something of himself. He's one of them crayon eaters in the Marines, and that man has been called white so many times by other Lakota Sioux.
Yep.
They keep telling him that kind of stuff, and luckily I don't think it gets to him anymore.
Well, yeah, I would imagine his nerves would deaden to it.
Wipes away tears with money he earned.
Right. Yes. Yeah, with his own toil, his own sweat, his own labor, all of which are admirable attributes. It's like they're trying to criminalize success and building a better life for oneself.
Absolutely, because it's easier to yell at successful people than it is to say, maybe I shouldn't have spent so much money on this. Maybe I should have learned a useful skill. Maybe I should have just deleted TikTok.
Maybe I shouldn't drink so much. Maybe I shouldn't use these narcotic drugs.
It's easy to blame other people for your own vices.
It really is. It's incredible how easy it is to pervert the human mind into blaming others for one's own failure, and then it's really easy right after that to take the next step and convert that blame into widespread social resentment. It's very much like when Lenin orchestrated the extermination of the Kulak class in Russia. So
I mean. And heck, even relating back into climate stuff, now we can blame rich people for destroying the climate. We have, if specific rich people aren't towing the line, we could say it's their industry that is creating all the pollution.
In spite of the fact that the Democratic Party, by and large, right now is the party of billionaires.
Oh yeah, and more important to that, or more important than that, ignoring the fact that China they make about 10 times more pollution than we do in just a year.
And India.
Oh my gosh. Okay, because that reminds me of solar panels. Those little things, terrible scam right now. Where basically, once a solar cell is spent, it's nigh impossible to really reuse, and if you try just burying them, it poisons the soil. So many of these things end up poisoning the soil if you put them in a landfill. There's nothing you can really do to reuse solar cells right now. Now, luckily, those are one of the few things that's getting some funding, figuring out how to make reusable solar cells.
Well, honestly, it shouldn't come as a surprise to us that the supposed solutions, the ostensible solutions proposed by these environmental activists, are actually far more deleterious to the environment than the non-renewable energy use that they so constantly rail against. And I wonder if it has anything to do with the fact that anytime you look at an area where there's been a left-wing, pro-climate change narrative rally, they usually trash the place in their wake.
Oh, I know.
They don't even pick up after themselves. So, they're notorious litter bugs.
And it gets worse because when those solar cells are spent, they'll still kind of work. I mean, just at less than 10% of what they could have done.
Very inefficiently.
And then they're sold off to India.
Oh, okay.
And then eventually they stop working entirely. And now you can't even make a wall out of these things because they're so brittle.
And then
you can't put them on your roof to protect against bad weather.
And India will just dump them off after that, probably.
Yep.
But it's all it's a horrible racket, and thank you so much for David for coming on here and shedding light on this really perverse, hellish marriage between the public sector and ostensibly private capital, to achieve this tyranny. And thank you for giving us some insight also into how Americans, particularly rural Americans, can effectively combat this advocacy wise. And thank you, of course, for your pro liberty and pro private property rights and pro limited government activism more broadly. And I'm very proud and honored to have taken part in at least one campaign with you on that. We look forward to having you on again at some point in the future to discuss a related topic. But for the time being, thank you so much once again. And I just want to say to everyone out there who's going to watch, thank you so much for joining us for yet another episode of CAPROPCAST. We look forward to seeing you next time. And until next time, Sic Semper Tyrannis.
Sic Semper Tyrannis.
Absolutely. And long live Rhodesia.
Amen.